you everybody so much for joining. I'm excited to have this wonderful panel of alumni who are willing to spend their very busy day with us and share a little bit of information about their philanthropic journeys and also perhaps a little bit about how the school helped them in their careers. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit about some career options that maybe you hadn't thought of as well. And so what I think we'll do first is just ask each panelist to do a brief introduction, and then Dean Pasick will lead us through some questions for the panel. So if Jeff, you would begin for us, that would be great.
Sure. I'm Jeff Small. I have an MA from the school. Technically, I have an MA from the College of Arts and Sciences, but I was a GA with the Center on Philanthropy at the time, and so they claim me. And I am now Vice President of Programs at the Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust, a private grant maker here in Indianapolis and in Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you. And Smita, would you go next, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Smita Vadakekalam. I have an MA from a very long time ago, 2001, in philanthropic studies. And I'm currently in New York, and I've been with my organization for 16 years. My role is COO and senior strategist at a consulting firm called Heller Consulting. And we work with nonprofits to help them implement technology, to devise technology strategies and change management. So I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. Angela?
There we go. Sure. Hi, I'm Angela Gill, and I'm the Executive Director of the MHP Foundation. We support the major health partners it's our healthcare system in my hometown, Shelbyville, Indiana. I've been in philanthropy for about 30 years, which really scares me to say that. 30 years seems like a long time. I've been with the Hospital Foundation for 16 of those years, and I got my master's in philanthropic studies in 2011.
Great. Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard Trollinger, and I completed the master's degree program in philanthropic studies in 2002. And although I'm not the first, there are other members of the panel who received their degree before I did. I would assure you that I'm the old man in the crowd. I retired this past summer from Centre College, where I had been on the staff for 26 years, 22 of those as Vice President for College Relations and 4 as Senior Philanthropy Advisor. And prior to that was at Emory and Henry College in Virginia for 23 years.
Thank you. And Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. Jennifer Zeisler. I graduated in 2004, and I did the dual MA and MPA programs. I currently live in Los Angeles, and I work at ECMC Foundation. We're a national foundation focused on improving post-secondary outcomes for students from underserved backgrounds. Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. I know the students will learn a great deal from you tonight. And Dean Pasick, would you like to begin with the questions?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to be your official questioner. I think this is a fun time, and I'm so pleased to see the students that I'm familiar with and other ones that I look forward to meeting as we go forward. So our first question goes to Angela. Angela, as an experienced fundraiser, what is your topmost advice for students who are entering the fundraising profession or looking to sharpen their skills?
Well, first of all, I have found that fundraising to be an extremely fulfilling career. You get the opportunity to offer opportunities to other people to do something that is bigger than themselves, larger than themselves, and to really be a part of something that is just so great, some cause that they love. As far as your sharpening your skills, I would prepare myself to learn how to get to know people and to ask questions, and also to listen very, very carefully. Sometimes people are asking a lot of questions and you wonder what's this all about. But sometimes the questions they're asking, that's not what they really want to know. But if you listen carefully, you can, and you get to know people, you know where they're going with those questions, and you're able to answer them in a way that is helpful to them. So I'd be getting ready to, if you don't already uh, feel like you like to get to know people and really build relationships with them, I'd work on that. I am naturally kind of introverted, and my work has forced me to be a little more extroverted than I would be normally. And I found that I like it. It's really fun to get to know people, and I've met so many great people. And some of my dearest friends are people that I have met through my fundraising work. So I, sharpen those listening skills and sharpen those getting to know people skills. The soft skills are really the most important, and knowing how to build trust with people is also very important because you're asking them to give you their hard-earned money for an idea that your organization may have, and if they trust you, they're more likely to. So learning how to get to know people, learning how to listen, learning how to ask questions, the kind of those probing questions and genuinely interested questions, and building trust with people. And of course, your education is really important too. A lot of times, and I see it especially in small communities, they'll hire someone because, well, she's so and so's daughter. She knows everybody and she's lived here for her whole life. Well, if you have sharpened those listening skills and those getting to know people skills, it doesn't matter where you're from if you're coming in to a new community. So, get that education and keep those soft skills, those people skills, keep those sharp.
Great, good advice, Angela. Thank you so much. Let's go to the other side of philanthropy. You were on the asking side, and we'll go to the giving side and go to Jeff. Jeff, tell us a little bit about how you got into grant making and what advice you would have for those of our students who are interested in going into grant making, and what are some of the challenges that students might anticipate?
Sure. So I got into grant making through my graduate assistantship through the school. I was an intern, a graduate assistant for the Pulliam Trust when I was in the MA program, and did a good job while I was there. Evidently, not a good enough job for them to hire me right away, but then left there on a good note, and then proceeded to work in a variety of settings around Indianapolis. A lot of cool opportunities, and then circled all the way back around and came back in 2014, almost a decade later, and joined the Trust's program team, and have worked my way up from there. In terms of if you're interested in grant making, which I'll admit, after I got into that space, and I was very firm when I was in the MA program that I did not want to be a fundraiser. And I was there just to think about everything and think about the stuff. And I saw Patrick Rooney's on the call. He gave me an opportunity to be a graduate assistant in the research department, which is a great place to just think about stuff and write and do that sort of thing. But of course, grant making jobs are kind of few and far between. So I did end up fundraising, and like Angela said, found it to be rewarding. Wasn't a perfect fit for me, but found good opportunities through it. I think if you I think I did myself a disservice being really focused on trying to get into grant making. And it sometimes took my eye off of maybe other opportunities and off of trying to make the best of the situations that I was in. and do my best there. I'm not saying I didn't perform well in my positions, but every once in a while when I get a wandering eye, I think, oh boy, if only I was in grant making. And then finally I landed in a position where I was enjoying it so much that I wasn't paying attention to that kind of thing anymore. I'd kind of said, you know what, I really like what I'm doing. I don't have to fantasize about grant making anymore. This is awesome. And then a grant making opportunity came along. So my advice in general is, if you want to end up in grant making, is certainly pay attention to the field, pay attention to opportunities, but first and foremost, knock it out of the park at whatever you're doing. There's a little bit of luck in ending up in grant making. And I will also say, it's not, Amir asked, or Dean Pasek asked about challenges. One thing I would say to folks, in grad school and kind of in the world in general, in the nonprofit sector, people sometimes look at grant making jobs as like, oh boy, that's a great job. And I'm not going to deny that it's a great job. It has different and generally lower level of stress than running a frontline agency or doing fundraising and that sort of thing. But it also in some ways lacks some of the agency that you have as, say, an executive director of an organization. I've told people before, it's not my money, and ultimately it's not my decision where it goes, because that's the decision makers in my organization are my trustees, who I make recommendations to and bring proposals to. So there's a bit of a hollowness to that you might not expect getting into it. Anything that I would say, hey, I built that, comes with a big caveat. So there's downsides to it. Now, that being said, I love it. I love the field. I love my peers. But there are downsides, and you have to be very reflective and have your own internal motivation to be a good grant maker, because it's easy to get snowed, and there's a lot of sort of fake niceness around you, and it's hard to measure whether you're good at it or not. So,
And you never tell a bad joke, is that right, Jeff?
oh yeah, I mean, I was nailing it. Patrick can tell you I was nailing it before, and it's only gotten better since I got into grant making.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Let's give Patrick Rooney, our Executive Associate Dean, a moment to introduce himself. We're pleased he's been able to join us.
Hi, everybody. Patrick Rooney, and I will say that Jeff was absolutely one of the best writers I've had in my class and in the research department. So it makes perfect sense that he wound up where he is.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Jeff. Let's I'll move back on to the asking side and to Richard Trollinger. When you joined the program, Richard, you were already a vice president, and you continued in that role as a vice president. So kind of how did the master's program help you in your career?
Thank you. My response really has two parts. The first is that I wanted to find answers to my why questions. In addition to having already served as a vice president at 2 colleges, I already had a master's degree in higher education administration. So I already knew a lot about what works in educational advancement and fundraising in particular. But having had a lifelong obsession with why questions, I wanted to know not only what works, but also, to the extent possible, to know why it is that so many people respond positively to our request of them to make gifts, and some respond very generously. Part 2 of the response is that, having decided in my early 20s that educational fundraising was my calling or my vocation, I wanted to know as much as I could about philanthropy and fundraising, which I often describe as 2 sides of the same coin. After completing the MA in philanthropic studies, I went on to pursue a PhD, focusing my dissertation research on the role of philanthropy in shaping the American system of higher education. And there's no question in my mind that studying and writing about philanthropy has made me a better fundraiser. And I like to think it's also made me a better person.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, Richard. Thank you for sharing that. Very thoughtful and very thoughtful response. Let's move on to Smita. So you've been out of the school for a while and have had a successful career. What is something that you have learned in your courses that you may still be applying today in your work?
Yeah, I love this question because I think my career is a little atypical maybe of some of the other graduates. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I'm in nonprofit technology. So I don't find a lot of people in the space I work in who have a background or education in philanthropy. So, but I find that the things that I have learned, you know, in my experience at the school really comes to play a lot in my career. And specifically, you know, my background's not in technology. And I think that it's more about the knowledge of the nonprofit sector because all of our clients are nonprofits. So I really go back to some of those fundamental courses and understanding, you know, nonprofit economics, really understanding how rich and diverse the sector is. And you really need to know that if you're going to consult in it, to understand the various verticals. So there's a lot of that kind of practical stuff that I draw from, but also, you know, the courses on like my ethics courses, a history of philanthropy. I often think about those discussions and debates we had and rhetorical questions about, you know, tainted money and just like questions that are still come to, you know, that are still questions today. And it's definitely something that I find really useful in my career. We work with nonprofits, we work with a lot of fundraisers, and we're thinking about technology and how is that going to help you advance your strategic goals. So it's critical. It's technology is just a tool. So you really need to understand the why, right? Behind what are you aiming for? What's your strategy? And that for me comes to, knowing that comes from my background and experience at the school. So it makes me, I think, a better consultant. The other thing that I think I often love in studying philanthropic studies, it's such a niche, I find, topic. Like that's, you know, if I share with people, this is what my MA is, and they're like, what is that? You know, and I love that because it's a little bit the intersection of a lot of different things. And that's kind of, I feel like, my career too. It's like nonprofit technology. Now that's very well known, but when I started, it was such a niche thing. And I love the intersection of the various different things. That's like something that I took from my, you know, my experience at the school, just seeing where philanthropy lives and where does it show up in all these different disciplines. And I love that about my experience there. So those are some of my reflections of that I got from my experience. Yep.
Well, thank you, Smita. I don't think there really is a career where our degree wouldn't help you. So I think that's a great thing. But also, I think this semester we're teaching for the first time. Professor Herzog is teaching a course on data for good. So is anybody taking that course on the call? Amjad is taking that. That's great. That's great. So we're moving toward technology as well. So let's move to Jennifer. Back to the foundation world. Jennifer, tell us about kind of the degree program and how it has informed your role at the foundation.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this question, and it's really hard. I can't point to one class, one professor, one skill, but maybe just like the collection of the experience. And I'll say so much of what Smita said rang true to me as far as reflecting on the interdisciplinary aspect of the program. But also the fact that I also, like Jeff, had an internship with a local organization. I worked at the Clues Fund, and I'm a hands-on learner. So that experience really gave me the opportunity to engage in the content in a more real way. And to go to my mentor there, Beth Castleman, who had been working in philanthropy for 20 years at that point, and just to be able to bounce things off of her and to talk about them in real time, that helped me really sit with the content in a different way than just reading it or even engaging in class. And then the other thing is the community. So I certainly have my group of classmates that I'm still in touch with and close with, but also that has grown for me over the last 15 years. And as I've gotten to meet people through various opportunities to connect with alumni from the school. So I couldn't point to one thing in particular, but I'll say that it was the academics and the experience and the community, and those are the through line to today. I mean, I can say that the academic together with that internship really set me up for my next opportunity, and that community is what has opened doors for me, kept me going, been the sounding board, and that I still take with me to this day. So I can show you the direct through line through my career, but also, how it is still with me here now.
That's great. That's great. I like the academic experience and community. We need to remember that when we're recruiting for new students. I think that's a good threefold benefit and threefold contribution. All right, we're going to do one more round of from our alumni guests, but for those of you who are listening in so patiently and eagerly, I think you can start putting your questions into the chat so you don't forget them, but we'll give you an opportunity to also ask them live and in person. So let's go back to Angela and ask for about tips, more practical tips. How do you stand out in an interview?
Well, just practical tips. It's a good question, and something that I have noticed my favorite candidates for a board position or for a job is that they come in, I can tell they've done some research on the organization on their own, and they come in with their own questions. I mean, you don't want to hijack the interview with all of your questions, but it's nice to show that you really do have a pretty good idea of what you're applying for, and that you're curious. That's another thing. When you're asking those questions, they can see that the interviewer can see that you're curious, that you've thought about this for a while, and you're not afraid to ask questions. That's important. You don't want to seem passive or like you're just there for them to kind of look you over and see if they think you'll be all right, and then be ready to listen. Like I said before on the first question, that listening is so important. You begin to figure out what they are really asking you. I was in an interview one time. I didn't get the job, but the interviewer asked me, Angela, how aggressive are you? And I know that I come across as kind of a gentle person, and I may be not don't pursue my goals in a hard way or anything like that. But as I talked to her, I realized she was curious about that. But what she really wanted to know is would I do the work? And I was able to tell her that I believe in fundraising. It's better to take a gentle approach with people, to ask questions, let them talk, let them fill you in on what they're doing, but then to be assertive or aggressive about getting your work done, but not to be aggressive with other people. That's not necessarily a good thing in fundraising. We're here to make friends, not boss people around. So it's good to go in with some questions of your own, to show some genuine interest, to show that you've really thought about this, and that you're genuinely interested in this job and want to make sure that it's as right for you as you are right for the organization.
Angela, I think that's great advice. And I also like the kind of the gentle but effective way that you talked about your self-awareness about the way you come across. And I think that's something that a lot of leadership programs talk about is, they build a lot of self-awareness. So you have a sense of what kind of impact you're likely to have on somebody else, and you use that to your advantage. I think that's great to hear.
Thank you.
Jeff, we're back to you. So if somebody wants to move up in their organization and in their career, what advice do you have for them?
I would say generally solve more problems than you create for the people around you. I think it's easy to kind of stay in one spot and to focus on your own work and do a good job, and that may get you promotion. It may move you up, but I think where I've been given more opportunities are times when I've gone out of my way to look for solutions and to help people solve things. Be curious about things beyond your job. Um, it's really easy to get siloed in your own department. Just showing curiosity to what different people do in your organization, and again, finding ways that you can help them do their job better in terms of if there's interaction between you or things that they just need a hand on. You would be surprised at the type of impression, like stuffing envelopes with somebody, or I don't think people collate things anymore. That sort of thing. The people at the trust really liked me when I was a graduate assistant because I loaded the dishwasher once. My wife will tell you it's not a habit I developed and stuck with, but I think show curiosity for what the people around you do. Look for ways to, again, solve problems for them, and don't create problems for other people. Like, make sure you're knocking it out of the park with your gig. And then if you're showing that initiative and that creativity, people almost have to give you opportunities. That's what I would say.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. I've got to remember to share that with some of my colleagues, that I appreciate their solving problems and not
Tell all your grad assistants to load the dishwasher.
Well, yeah, or do the equivalent remotely. You got to be creative in this environment. What is the remote equivalent of loading the dishwasher? That's a good question. Richard, let's turn back to you and talk a little bit about mentorship. We often hear that having a mentor is very important in advancing one's career. Why is it important to have a mentor, and what kind of tips do you have to finding the right mentor?
All right. Thank you. From my perspective, it's very important. I've sought out role models and mentors all my life in nearly every endeavor I've undertaken, and I've been fortunate to have had some very good ones. While I'm a great believer in the importance of research and try to read or review all the marvelous research findings that Dr. Rooney and his colleagues produced at the Lilly School, the actual solicitation of gifts is still more of an art than a science, I believe. And that is why mentors can be so important to those who want to achieve success in fundraising. The same is true, I think, of leadership. And in that vein, I would emphasize the importance of choosing someone you admire to be your mentor. Perhaps I was shy, or maybe things were just done differently in my day, but I never formally asked anyone if he or she would mentor me. I just sort of adopted them. That does not seem to be the way it is done these days, which I think it's a very good thing. Although it has been nearly 20 years now, I'll never forget receiving an email one day from a young man who wrote to ask if I would be his mentor. He was not someone I knew or had ever heard of, but he explained the research approach he had taken that eventually led him to me. Because I don't want to take too much time with that, let me say that that he had started his research with alumni. We had both attended one of the same schools. And he worked through that group until he found someone from a similar background and who was now doing the kind of work that he wanted to do. And so, I would encourage today's Lilly School students to not hesitate to reach out to alumni to ask them about being, their mentor. And I like that. I've been asked any number of times since that first incident. But if we believe in philanthropy, we believe in reciprocity and paying it forward. And I've never been able to find it within me to say no. So, and I think you'd find most other people to be the same way.
Thank you, Richard. I would certainly expect kind of the first instinct among our community to be kind of mutual generosity. But Richard, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about, so what happens in a mentoring relationship? So somebody becomes your mentor, and that's great, but what does that mean? What happens next?
Okay. Well, this person whom I at that point go back to the first one who asked me, somehow he had even learned that I had been, or I am, a first generation college student. And that was important to him because he was. And so while he was in a graduate program and working part-time at a university development office, he would call me and ask questions about prospects. I remember it was kind of charming in its own way. He called me one day and told me that the school was going to send him to a case conference. And he said, "How am I supposed to dress? What do you wear when you go to a case conference?" And that sort of tacit knowledge that he didn't have. And but sometimes it has to do with career moves. Sometimes it's just being there as a sounding board, of someone to listen and ask questions and help the mentee, work through his or her thinking about what they want to do. Some of them are in person, but most of mine have not been. They've been emails and telephone calls.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. What do I wear? You try Googling that and getting a good answer. Right?
That's right.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Smita, consulting is such an important part of philanthropy, and it seems like there's a lot of career opportunities there. And obviously, there's a big contribution to the effectiveness and efficiency of nonprofits that one contributes to. What kind of insights, tips would you have for people who are interested in exploring consulting?
Yeah, thinking about this, I think it's important to have hands-on experience working at nonprofits, which I'm sure most of you will have or have, especially being at the school. I think that's really, really important, just for credibility and just understanding of all of that. Also, I think, depends on what type of nonprofit consulting you get into, but it's really important to really stay abreast with understanding the sector and what's happening. As a consultant, that's why it's your responsibility to come with, what are those best practices, what works, what doesn't work, and like applying that to different contexts. So that's why people hire us. So it's, I feel like we're students for life. We need to make sure we understand what's keeping our tabs on what's happening, what's working, what's not. I also think what's really fascinating and gets really interesting in nonprofit consulting is also studying what's happening in other sectors and taking from that some of the interesting things that are happening and applying it to the nonprofit sector. And that's where kind of the magic happens. I'll give you like a specific example in my context in nonprofit technology. So for example, like design thinking or change management, these are things that are done in different sectors. And I found it really interesting to apply some of that with the nonprofit technology projects we're working. And that's where it gets really creative and interesting, because it's not just taking like what the for-profit sector does and just, scaling it. It's really thinking about the nuances and the expertise you have in the nonprofit sector and what's special about it, and how do you adapt and scale and make something new. And I think for me, that's like one of the most interesting aspects. So yeah, those are just some of the things on top of my head. I think you're a student for life if you're going to be a consultant, and it's your responsibility to keep abreast to what's happening and apply that.
And I thought that that's the reason I became an academic, so I could be a student for life. I didn't know there was an opportunity to be a consultant. This sounds really exciting.
Well, I think if you're a good consultant, you should be a student for life, is my
That's
opinion.
great.
Maybe it's an opinion. Yeah.
No, I like the analogy, and we all know some, the importance of consulting companies often coming up with important conceptual breakthroughs in the field, whether it's kind of bridge spans and the FSGs in the nonprofit world, or the McKinseys and the Bains in the for-profit world, and the Heller Consultings as well. So that's great. Thank you, Smita. All right, Jennifer. Sometimes people come to the master's program because they're looking for a big career change. What do you tell them? What kind of advice do you have for those people who want to make a big change?
Yeah, I'm so glad you gave me this question. I actually have both a framework to share, but also some practical advice. And I think this works for anyone leaving the program, whether it's a career change or just career launch. So I've sort of had this theory on career changes in general. And this comes from my time working as a career counselor and as a recruiter. And so I think you have 4 variables and you have to decide how you're going to prioritize them. And is it what you do, where you live, how much money you make, or when that change happens? So the position, the geography, the financial, and the timing. And so let me give you a couple examples. So when I was looking for this position that I have now, where I've been for 6 years, I was prioritizing Los Angeles. I wanted to be closer to family. And so that was the number one thing that was important to me. Secondary to that was what I did. I have a specific skill set, but within that, I sort of had a range of jobs that I would be open to. Next for me was financial. I know that I have bills, I have, a lifestyle to maintain. So I knew that I had a certain range that I was willing to accept. And then last was timeline. It took me about 1.5 years from the time I decided to look for a new opportunity until I secured this job. And so for me, the urgency was less important than all those other things that I talked about. For someone who's leaving the graduate program, you might feel that timeline is the most important thing. Maybe you're gonna leave your parents in health insurance, or student loans are gonna, start knocking on your door. Maybe that timeline urgency is the most important, and all those other things are secondary. But I think you have to figure that out, because in the perfect world, you'll get all of them, and that has happened for me a few times in my career, but it hasn't happened every time. And so I had to really decide where my priorities were. So that's the framework. I really stand by it, but I will welcome edits and changes as other people think of what those 5th or 6th variables should be. But I also have a couple tips on practical advice. So look at your resume, update your resume, and also have other people look at it. I specifically recommend somebody in the field that you want to get into, but also someone who doesn't know your field and is just like a good editor or reviewer, can sort of look at it with a sort of objective lens. But you want someone in that field that you're trying to break into to make sure you're using the right language and you're presenting yourself in a way that is relevant to that field. So I'll give you a quick tip on this. I recently hired for a communications manager. I'm a program person, but I help with hiring in our organization. Resumes for communications positions look very, very different than resumes for program positions. I had no idea. That's not a field I normally work in. So make sure that what you're presenting looks and sounds as it should for the field you want to break into. I also recommend use your network. So I should be paid, I should be given like, I don't know, advertising dollars by LinkedIn, but I seriously think it is like the best tool that has showed up since I started my professional career. And Richard already set this up so nicely for me, but like really use the network you already have or find the network you don't have and search the Lilly family school and find that position you want or the geography you want or whatever it is and reach out to people. I think generally speaking, people are going to reply. Conduct informational interviews. People gave me that advice so many times in my life and I ignored it and I thought it was stupid and I hate networking and I was like, I don't want to network, I want a job. But I've also seen in real time, my managers have hired people that they met in informational interviews because they knew them, they had some interaction, they maybe saw something in that person that wasn't showing up on their resume. I believe in informational interviews. I think they're important, both for networking, but also just to get to know the field better. And then the last thing I'm going to say, in addition to reaching out to people you do or don't know, also don't be afraid to apply to a job, even if you don't know someone there. So we certainly all know that warm lead is really beneficial. But I can say almost every job I've ever received, not counting maybe 1 or 2 internships, I did cold. I did not know a single person at the organization. I had no warm lead. I didn't do an informational interview. I sent in my resume into a black hole and it turned into a job. So that is an avenue too. I know it's not recommended. I know that Pamela's probably like, stop talking, Jennifer, because that's not what we tell them to do. But it is also another option. Put yourself out there because you just never know. And that is all of my framework and my practical advice.
Well, that's terrific. This is a career. We had a terrific kind of career preparation seminar tailor-made for the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Why don't I turn it back over to Pamela and she can help field the questions. Is that okay, Pamela?
Yes, and it looks like Amjad has one she would like to ask.
Oh, hi, hi, Jennifer. I just wanted to ask if you have any recommendations on how to set up an informational interview. I have not done this before, so I appreciate any tips.
Yeah, so as I said, I was like a really bad student in that I didn't ever take the advice. So the advice I'm giving is from what I've received, and maybe other folks here have advice from how they've gone about it as a dutiful student. But generally, people that I don't know have emailed me either through a contact or via LinkedIn and said, I would like to learn more about what you do. Would you be willing to meet with me for 15 minutes or meet me for coffee in normal times? Or could I have 30 minutes of your time to learn more about your role? It's super informal. It's just, there's like, sometimes people come with a very specific, like, I want to move into grant making. Can we have that discussion? And sometimes it's just very like informal. I'd like to get to know you and the work that you do. So that's how I've experienced it. I'm always willing to do it. I think 30 minutes is a completely respectable amount of time. And I see the other alumni shaking their heads, yes. So please, others chime in as well.
I think for lack of a better term, I mean, a cold email is standard. Now, a lot of the informational interviews that I've done have come from referrals, you know, people that I trust or people at the school. You know, Bill Stan sends people my way frequently. People who are in a class that might need some sort of insight on foundations will come my way. But yeah, shoot an email. And if it's somebody who's a Lilly school grad or has a connection, that's a good way to start. Hey, I'm a student, or I just graduated, you know, heard your name, saw you speak or whatever. Would love a few minutes of your time. And yeah, I almost always say, yeah, cool.
I'll say,
sorry.
I did this 20 years ago. I remember it viscerally, just like at the Lilly School. It wasn't called Lilly School back then, Center on Philanthropy, printing out on Idealist I wanted to work for arts organizations, and I was going to move to New York. So I literally like printing on idea lists, circling it up, sending the emails, and it was great. I didn't get any of those jobs, but I still remember those conversations. People were open. And I will say this as someone who was asked to do informational interviews. One thing is, as long as you present yourself as curious about the field or getting to know the person, but if there's an ask like, I want a job, that feels less likely to, I would be less likely to entertain that conversation. Then it feels like it's one-sided. Like people are always willing to share about themselves, like we're doing today, and their career path. So as long as there's no like hard ask, that's my personal opinion about like, I just want to talk to you because I want a job. Maybe that's not a great approach.
I would also say, you know, if there are certain either organizations or types of organizations that you're interested in, ask around, ask your professors, ask me, you know, ask others at the school that might have some connections for you, because I do think it's a little easier if you know someone there, but I also think you should be brave and ask even if you don't. But don't be afraid to ask for help at the school too. I mean, we're your best resource right now. And I think if you can say too that you're a student when you're asking for informational interviews, you know, that people want to help students. They want to help you learn, and they want to help you in that process of professional growth. So great advice, everybody. Students, do we have other questions?
Yes, I have a question. My question pertains more to the grant making side. So probably more Jeff or Jennifer. I'm just wondering, what would you say is the hardest part about your job?
For me personally, the hardest part, I mean, the easy answer is saying no, you know, but you get kind of used to that pretty quick. So for me, the hardest part is figuring out if I'm doing it right. I mean, it's so like difficult to tell what your impact on the process is because you're not the one doing a lot, you know, you're just evaluating and recommending, and then, you know, getting funding out the door. And there's so many factors other than you that determine success or failure of the initiative. It's figuring out, okay, how am I doing, and how can I do better? Because you can get really focused on stuff that isn't impact. I mean, am I, you know, producing the right work product? Is it error free? Is it timely? Is it all these things? And the things that you can see, not am I reading the right things? Am I bringing the right people together? Did I get in people's way? Like, it's really hard, and you have to have an internal motivation, because you can sit and do okay and live in this field forever. It's hard to be like, boy, that's a bad program officer. It's real easy to do middle of the road work. But if you have that drive and really want to make a difference, that's hard. It's hard to figure out. That's my burden. Jennifer, do you have a better answer?
No, I definitely agree with that. I also think in your earlier answer, you talked about the role that we play and that we're sort of stuck in the middle between the grantees and our board, who are, you know, the ultimate decision makers. I think to take that a step further, there's a lot of tension there between what the board thinks and wants and what our program team thinks and wants, and also recognizing we're in a place of privilege, to really bring humility to the work. Like, our grantees are the ones doing the work. We are just like passing through money, you know, and figuring out our role there, and making sure that we're being responsive but also strategic. I mean, there's like all these like super weird tensions in grant making that are, again, I will always say, like, we're not having to stress about keeping the lights on, and that's the privilege that comes into this work. So it's hard to talk about the challenges, but there's those tensions. I think a lot about that, the pendulum, which is like in my philanthropic career, when I started, you know, it was like, give away the money, good luck, hope it all goes well. And then, you know, we went to this other place where we're like, outcomes, objectives, accountability. And we've like, strangled these grantees. And so now it's, trying to dial that back a little bit, but it's really like, we got to move the field along, and it takes time. So it can be sort of a frustrating place to be, I think, especially in the role that I think Jeff and I are playing between like our teams and our grantees and our board, or our leadership and our board.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Looks like Gertrude has one. Is she able to?
Gertrude, do you want to ask in person, or would you like? Oh, there we go.
I'm having a voice problem. That's why I typed the question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so she's a student managing an NGO in Grenada and was thrown the job of grant manager a few weeks ago. Never done grant making before with no guidelines. Any suggestions?
So are you having to like request funds and submit applications, or are you on the back end kind of managing the funds and outcomes of the programs?
I'm at the front. I have to request projects for funding. I already have the funds from a donor from the German bank, and I'm in the process now of distributing the funds.
Oh, cool. Anybody else have advice? I mean, I think the first advice that I always give folks is, especially in that position where you're kind of in between, is approach it from a position of you're working with peers, and not a position of less than or more than. I think if you just approach both your potential sub-grantees and the grantor with that mindset that, hey, I'm honestly trying to figure this out and I have questions, where you have them, approach them like people. Where I see people get into trouble is where they're afraid or try to over plan a conversation or a question and worried about how they're going to look and oh, it's going to make Jeff angry, and then they'll never give me money again. Honest questions between peers all day long, and just show that you want to do it right.
I think that's good advice from Jeff. And I would also look around and see if I couldn't find someone that would give me some guidelines. What kinds of programs am I supposed to be looking for to fund? That would really help you do your job a lot if you knew more about what kind of projects you were looking for.
Thank you.
And keep good records.
Thank you.
I'm looking at Smita, just thinking about like database, even if it's just Excel, just keep documentation.
I have a
Don't be
question.
afraid to throw the other people under the bus. Like, hey, they left me with nothing. I'm trying to.
DeAndrea, did you have a question?
I do. And I mean, I suppose anybody can answer this, but I would be curious to hear from some of our more, how shall I say, senior folks on the call. I am in a very interesting place because I'm very much midlife and had quite a bit of career coming to this point, and am doing an entire change. Like, I'm going into a field that I know nothing about. So how do you, I guess my question would be, how do you balance and present yourself with, you know, the knowledge and experience, all that kind of stuff that you do have, the expertise that you do have, but that maybe doesn't, at least on the face, seem to translate into this new area? So balancing like being sort of expert in one field, but complete student and novice in another.
I'll just chime in with one quick thought and then welcome others. But I will just say, you can really talk about that you are already a professional. And even if your other experience isn't related, it is related in the professional world. You know how to be a professional. And that will get you definitely, credit in the process. So don't discount your previous experience, even if it's not directly related. I bet it's more related than you think it is.
I think Jennifer's right. I think if you present yourself as a professional, people will see you that way. And I think that they will see you as brave and bold and curious and excited about doing something new. Not everybody has enough nerve mid-career to step off that cliff and try something new. So, another good thing to talk about would be, your excitement for trying this, whatever this new thing is, and how much, how you're looking forward to learning and that kind of thing.
I'm just thinking about when we hired someone who was in that position, who made a career change, and how she approached it. And we hired her. And I do like everything what everyone said was, she articulated what she brought to it, but she also did, which was really resonated really to a lot of us, was very humble about not knowing, but being very curious, and that she's willing to learn. Because I think sometimes, and it's when you're hiring, you want to make sure people are open and curious and not too set in their ways. So you're like trying to balance, and you said it perfectly. You're like an expert, yet you're also new to some things. It's like the balance of both, being open and curious, but also bringing to that situation all the wonderful experience you have.
All right, I think we're coming to the final few minutes. Do we have any last questions from anyone? All right, well, thank you so much to the panel for spending this time with our students. I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure that they did too, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.